Welcome to Balance, the show encouraging moms to shed the guilt and create their own balance to work motherhood and not have motherhood work them. It's now time to create a new mindset, and for the time we have together, I hope to help you do just that. Hi everyone, I'm Veronica Greety. We're all trying to adjust to this new normal of quarantine life. But for mothers, and I speak from experience, the challenge can be very difficult since you are now adding teacher to the many stack of hats that you are now wearing on a daily basis. While making sure lessons are completed, how do you make sure that the mental health of you and your family are staying intact? Here to give us some coping techniques is licensed clinical psychologist and owner of the Brighter Hope Wellness Center, Dr. Cindy T. Graham. Dr. Cindy, thank you so much for joining us on the show today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So first I have to ask, how are you and your family doing?
Thank you. Thank you so much. We are doing well. We are in Maryland, so we're one of the states that has some of the more aggressive lockdown, stay-at-home, shelter-in-place procedures. So yeah, we've been doing well. I think this is the beginning of week 6, if I remember correctly. I've kind of stopped counting.
I know. I
So yeah, we're doing well. Thank you. How about you guys?
We're doing well. Like I think like everyone, we're just trying to take it one day at a time, trying to adjust to this new normal, trying to stay sane in doing that. And that's why we're
Right.
happy to have people like you to help us
Thank
do that.
Thank you.
So let's talk about how this pandemic is affecting children, because I think for adults, we're able to vent and talk about how it's affecting us. We're able to go on FaceTime, house party, all these, whatever apps we can go on to just let our steam out. We're like, can't take it anymore, or I'm coping, we're able to relate with one another. But for children, it's kind of hard. How is the pandemic affecting them?
Yeah, so for kids, it's interesting because I've seen basically two reactions, and now it's kind of melding into just one reaction. So the initial reaction was kids who were excited for the pandemic to hit, not because of like the harm, but more because they weren't in school anymore, so they weren't going to be stressing out about schoolwork and assignments and SATs and this whole process. So they were really excited for the potential of schools being closed. Obviously with kids, their level of awareness and empathy might not always be where we would hope it would be. We would hope that they would, see that this was representative of a larger issue. But, I get it from their perspective. The second group of kids were kids who were worried and anxious from the beginning.
Yeah.
Those are kids who usually are particularly connected to like news sources and discussions with their parents about what's going on. And really now what I'm seeing is that everybody has been melding into the group of just worry and concern, because for the first group, now that they're seeing how long this is happening and how long this is going for, they're really starting to worry then about like, how am I going to stay caught up in school? Am I losing opportunities for learning? Kids who are getting ready to like apply to college, like what is that implication going to be for them? Are they going to still be competitive for the schools that they want to go to? So we're definitely seeing a lot more. So a lot of increase in anxiety, worry. I'm seeing more crying, more isolation. Some kids are just not getting out of bed. And those are kids who historically, prior to the pandemic, had difficulties with motivation, school attendance, things like that. And so we're really seeing, quite a significant regression across the board, and then an increase in irritability, just having to be around your family more, and you're not used to that. There's definitely a lot that's happening right now for kids.
Well, how much screen time should they be getting? So when I say screen time, I mean the news. I mean, for me, it's kind of
Right.
hard, even though I am in this medium, it is difficult for me to sit and hear so much about the death count and how it's increasing. How much news should we be allowing our children to take in?
Yeah, so kids should really have a very limited amount. So teenagers, it's more appropriate for them to have larger amounts of news consumption. But even then, I would say an hour a day is more than plenty. I would probably limit it to about half an hour, because once you get past that half hour news cycle, they're just kind of repeating the main stories for the day. And it
Mhm.
is important for teenagers to be up on information, because they're trying to transition into adulthood. So I think it is important for teens to have more information. For middle schoolers, and certainly for elementary schoolers, less access, just kind of updating them as necessary. If they do have questions in terms of what the death toll is, try to keep it as general as possible. Rather than giving numbers, give percentages. Or if you're going to give numbers, give a wider representation. Again, not that because the percentage is low, it makes the death okay. It just makes it more tolerable for kids, because what they're going to start to worry about is whether or not they're at risk, whether their friends are at risk, whether their loved ones are at risk. And so it's just going to increase their anxiety. And so it is better to be careful in how you present that information. And then certainly for kids who are preschool age and younger, they really don't need to be having access to the news like that. By and large, they don't need to have access to like listening to the conversations that adults would be having. You should limit the conversation with them to really giving them a general overview of what the coronavirus is, and how it's getting germs from other people, and it's hurting people sometimes, and it's causing some people to go to the hospital, but most people are recovering pretty well. So you really have to tailor it for the age of the child. But in general, I would say even for teenagers, actually even for adults, I would say limit it to an hour of news each day. Make sure that you're staying up to date on everything, but that you're not inundating yourself in the constant in the con- because there's so much conflict going on. Like at every turn there's some new conflict that's happening,
Yeah.
uh with the pandemic in general. So really limiting it to an hour for adults, and then half an hour at most for teenagers, and then really little to no access for really young kids.
I love how you broke it down because I'm actually seeing anxiety creep up in children as young as, like you said, elementary school age, even younger, because it's like they're not used to being home this long. You're telling them, we have to stay inside. And even when they do go out, they have to wear a mask. So what can we do? Because it's not, we're calling it the new normal, but for them there's nothing normal about not being able to go outside and play. How can parents begin to work it so that they're lessening the anxiety that our kids are now having?
Yeah, so it's a multi-step process. It does start, ideally the foundational work was started prior to this pandemic, and that's one of the reasons why I love like working with families and working with kids, is really teaching parents that even though some of the things that I may recommend might sound, I don't think that they necessarily sound like harsh or strict, but they're consistent. I look for consistency
Which is
as
key.
much as possible.
Consistency is
Yeah.
key. I always say that.
Right, exactly, exactly. And that's because when you have a pandemic that kind of comes out of nowhere,
Mhm.
that you're better prepared for getting like compliance and having your children listen, because they're used to a certain routine, or they're used to you guiding them in a way that makes sense, and they trust you, and so they go with it. So for myself, my kids, I have two boys.
Mhm.
They're
How old are
7.5. They're 7 and 5,
you?
7.5 and like 5.5. But yeah, so they're young. And I remember, so that first week, right? First week, everybody was chilling. Like everybody was doing pretty well that first week.
Like, oh, I'm fine. Vacation. You're right.
Right, exactly, exactly. And then I remember it was when they definitely said like social distancing, no playing, like no play dates.
Mhm.
And my youngest son heard some of our neighborhood kids playing, so that was when people were implementing it inconsistently. Um and we're like, sorry, you can't play. And he got really, really upset. And that broke my heart. And I was like, okay, this is going to be tougher than I was expecting. So that particular day was tough. But then after that, like, he just understood because we had explained, we had talked about, I happen to have a medical condition that puts me at risk if I were to catch it. So, giving them that level of awareness of like, and they've always known, like they've known that I have this illness, and mommy doesn't look sick, but mommy has this illness, but mommy's doing really well, and things. And so because I'm clear with them on terms that they can understand, they know it's important for mommy to not catch the coronavirus, and therefore they have to be careful to not catch it either, so that they don't pass it on to me. I mean, obviously also for themselves, but to make sure that I can stay healthy too. And after that, it just hasn't been an issue. And even when they want to go outside to play, they're like, hey, can we play in the front? And then I kind of look at them and they're like, there aren't any kids out front. I'm like, okay. So when you set that foundation with them, it helps. And so it's establishing clear rules with them, and being giving them, not that I know sometimes parents have a really hard time with feeling like they have to justify themselves to their kids. It's not justifying yourself, it's explaining to them why something is happening, because it's important for kids to know that actions have consequences. So, like with the coronavirus, if one of you were to catch it, I might catch it, and then that means I'm in the hospital. And so, it's important for them to understand, like, don't stick a fork in the outlet because you can get electrocuted. That means that electricity goes through your body, and it can hurt you. It's important to provide explanation to kids without going overboard. And so that's basically how they start to understand the consequences of what happens. Flexibility is also important during this time period. So I know I said consistency in one way, but then it's like a flexible routine really is what you want, because you're creating a new normal.
And yeah, and that's what I always say. I always say, the name of the show is balance, but I always say it's funny because we're not exactly that. You have to create your own new balance, right? So whatever
Mhm.
is working for you and your family, that's what you have to do to move forward.
Right, exactly. And it's when we talk about work-life balance, I always say to people that it is a myth. Like, the scales are never really, I mean, if it is balanced for people, I clap it up for them, because that is so hard to do. Because really it's more of, how far are the scales tipping one way or the other. You want to try to keep it somewhat in balance, but at any given point in time, you probably are picking either your own like self-care for the care of your family, or you're choosing your work and your work deadlines and responsibilities, and kind of sacrificing your family in some ways. And so part of this process of being a parent is knowing that it's okay for the balance to always be unbalanced, because there's balance in unbalance, as long as it's not unbalanced too far for too long. So
Real quick, I just want to just ask you, what about parents who have children with special needs? Because now we're dealing with something different. We're dealing with children who are used to a specific routine. They have, therapy sessions that they are used to going to. It's hard for them at this time. How do parents deal with their children, and how do they make sure that they're not regressing, and that that we ourselves, that we're not regressing also.
right, yeah, so it's really tough. The first thing that I would say is that to not necessarily look at regression as a bad thing necessarily. Certainly you don't want a lot of regression, but during this time period and during this pandemic, regression is inevitable. And I think if we try to really hold on to this idea of we must maintain where we were before the start of the pandemic, and continue to like push and move forward, then we're putting a lot of pressure on ourselves. And that's pressure that we're going to pass on to our kids, more than likely, through our own frustration and just trying to manage everything. The fact of the matter is, we're in the middle of a pandemic, so things have regressed, by the nature of what it is. So when we can approach, when we adjust our mindset to approach it, so that we understand, okay, there's going to be some backsliding and my goal is to minimize it. But even if there is a huge regression, which odds are there won't be a huge regression in that way, but even if there were to be a huge regression, it's knowing that you can overcome that. That if you regress, that means that was a point that they were at previously. They can absolutely move past that point. It's not, it's not an end all be all. It's not saying that that's where they're going to stay. It's just where they are at for the time period. And that might be necessary, because kids feel the stress, they feel the pressure, they're out of their routine, they're no longer in their school settings where they had support, speech and language and occupational therapy, and getting pulled out to go see the guidance counselor. And maybe they were also seeing a therapist themselves, like face to face. And now they're having to do teletherapy. These are huge adjustments for kids. And so giving them that latitude and space to say that, like, that regression is okay, because we're, everybody's struggling, we all go through these time periods of anxiety and worry and concern. So it's important to remember the humanity and the compassion in all of this, for our kids, especially for kids with special needs. And then communication, I would say, is the other big thing to keep in mind when you are helping your child with special needs through this process, that oftentimes their communication needs are different. So you just really want to make sure that what you are conveying to them, that you're always conveying it in a way that makes sense to them. And it might be difficult that, if you are seeing a regression, that you might have to be taking some steps back, and the work that you had done, maybe you used to be able to give them 3-step directions and now you're back down to 2. You have to understand if that's where they're functioning. And there are a lot of adults, that are not functioning well, at this point, that they might not be, showering regularly, or they might not feel that motivation to do their work even from home. Adults show regression as well. So it's important to see, like, if you do have to take a couple of steps back, it's so much better to make sure that you're getting success at the level that they are, rather than getting lack of success or failure at a higher level, and to have that kind of feeling of frustration and lack of accomplishment setting in for the child.
Those were awesome tips, but I would like to get 3 tips from you that you can give to families as to how they can cope at this time. Like you said, we are going to regress, but how do we not put ourselves down, and how do we make sure that we are still moving forward?
Yeah, definitely. So first and foremost, I would say to focus on the positive. So focus on the things that are going well. If your child is, getting up in the morning and, at least getting anything done, be proud and praise that. As a family, if you used to be a family that used to eat out, 2 to 3 meals a day, or, multiple times a week, and now you're having to cook for yourselves, like, find those things to praise yourself about, and your kids about as well. If they're taking over some tasks, or maybe there's always something that kids are doing that we don't give them enough credit for. Maybe they're complying with their tasks more. Basically, it's catching them being good. So really focus on the positivity, focus on, those time periods of doing things together as a family. That's always where I like for families to start first and foremost, is focus on the positive, establish really good family-based routines, family time, so that you can, you have those positive moments to go off of. 2 would be kind of what I mentioned earlier. So communication, and really making sure that, and that's also why I kind of broke down in terms of access to the news according to age, because it does change as kids get older. So for younger kids, they're not going to be as aware, but they're going to notice tension and anxiety and differences in our behavior. So we have to make sure that the things that we communicate, even for our preschoolers and our toddlers, that we still communicate with them, but just on their level. And then lastly, I would say, really, like I mentioned earlier, is the consistency. And so it's understanding that it's natural for kids, whether they're neurotypical or whether they're special needs, to push the boundaries, to test and to see, okay, is this rule in place now? Or maybe it's not. And so it's to stay consistent as much as possible, to provide consequences as soon as possible, rather than letting, let's say their room is messy. If you had set the standard for them that they should be cleaning it up before they move on to their next activity, don't wait an hour or 2 hours before you go back and prompt them to clean their room. It's not as relevant to them anymore if you want them doing it right after they're done with the activity. And I would say I'm gonna throw in a fourth, to be realistic, in terms of where your family is functioning, because if you have a child that is just not going to put away the toys right after they're done playing, perhaps setting aside different times across the day for cleaning up is the better way to go, and that's what's going to reduce the overall level of tension and stress. So it's really knowing where your child or children are functioning and really playing off of that in terms of like the consistency and things that you expect of them. It's kind of like, it's parenting, but kind of thinking outside of the box. So not adhering. So that's where the flexibility comes in, is that you want certain basic things to happen, but you want to be creative and flexible in how you implement them. And then when you find that thing that works, keep that going. If you find that after a while it doesn't work anymore, feel free to pivot and change it a little bit. That's natural. But to try to be as consistent as possible. And then of course, like if these are things that you're really struggling with, certainly feel free to seek the help of a mental health professional, a psychologist, counselor, social worker. There are lots of providers out there that can give support in these times.
Excellent. So please just let us know your contact information and also your social media so that anyone can reach out to you if they have any questions.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. So my practice is Brighter Hope Wellness Center, and we're located in Howard County in Maryland, so just outside of Baltimore and a little bit north of DC. The website is brighterhopewellness.com, and it is Brighter Hope WC pretty much everywhere: Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. And then my personal handle across the channels are Cindy T. Graham, PhD. And so, I'm always talking about mental health. I'm talking about parenting. Those are and self-care and attempt at somewhat of a balance in life. So I look forward to interacting with you.
We'll definitely be checking out your IG for all your stories and for everything that you're putting on Facebook and social media. Thank you so much, Dr. Cindy. It's been great talking to you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Continue to
stay safe and well.
You too.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you so much for joining us. You can catch a new episode of Balance every week right here on our YouTube page for Moms Make It Work. Make sure and hit that subscribe button, and also subscribe to Balance, a new mindset for moms, wherever you listen to podcasts. Continue to stay safe and healthy, and remember, no matter the circumstances, to always let your light shine. God bless.